Let's say I'm a CISO listening in on this conversation. What do I do to make sure that my organization has done the needful when it comes to securing their browsers? What are maybe a checklist of items or a set of steps? What would you recommend?
See, secure browser is really one component to zero trust journey. So when you think about CISOs who are in a way making sure that as CIOs go on their cloud transformation, security doesn't get compromised. You want to make sure you have a zero trust architecture. So now, as part of zero trust framework, like I said at the beginning, you want to make sure that security actions happen as close to the edge as possible. Now, having said that, now let's get to your question. How do I make sure my browser is ready? Honestly, this is a choice. A lot of commercial browsers that are built for delighting customers, for convenience, for the jazz. They're not for security. As those browsers get attacked every day, the commercial browsers are not really reacting at that agility. First of all, you want to make sure your browser is hardened. It's a secure browser. It's optimized for enterprise. It's not optimized for personal because it creates more attack vectors. So first of all, making sure you have a hardened browser. That's the first part. The second part is making sure that if you enable access to your corporate applications through the browser can enforce the right security and DLP policies in the browser. That becomes very important. And the third, last but not the least, how does that browser provide your network security, which is really the zero trust, added visibility, added granularity to make more intelligent security decisions?
Welcome to the Cybersecurity Readiness Podcast Series with Dr. Dave Chatterjee. Dr. Chatterjee is the author of the book Cybersecurity Readiness, a holistic and high-performance approach, a Sage publication. He has been studying cybersecurity for over a decade, authored and edited scholarly papers, delivered talks, conducted webinars and workshops, consulted with companies, and served on a cybersecurity SWAT team with Chief Information Security Officers. His work on proactive cybersecurity has been featured on USA Today. Dr. Chatterjee has been a tenured professor at the Terry College of Business at the University of Georgia. As a Duke University visiting scholar, Dr. Chatterjee teaches in the cybersecurity programs at the Pratt School of Engineering.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Cybersecurity Readiness Podcast Series. I'm your host, Dave Chatterjee. Today, we are talking about the new browser wars. Why the enterprise browser has become most contested surface in cybersecurity and what it means for business leaders. I'm delighted and honored to have as my guest today, Mr. Anupam Upadhyay, who's a senior leader at Palo Alto Networks. Anupam has spent over 2 decades advancing networks and security solutions, and so I can't think of anybody else who could do a better job talking on this subject than him. So without any further ado, Anupam, I'd like to extend to you a very warm welcome.
Thanks, Dave, for having me. Great to be here and to be chatting with you.
Fantastic. So how about we begin by you sharing with the listeners some highlights of your professional journey?
Oh, Dave, that's a good question. I've been in the industry for 25 plus years now. And I'm a product manager at heart. I started as a developer. I was a software developer for a very short stint in India, then came to the US, started working at Cisco, and always fascinated with product management. As a developer, I developed code for routing, for switching, and I'm dating myself for things like ATM, not the ATM that you draw money from, but the ATM protocol. And then I was always fascinated, Dave, from the beginning about how features are used by customers. And I'll give you an example, Dave. I was talking to a product manager way back in 2005, I think. And he told me a very interesting use case about the actual ATMs. I used to build a feature where you just duplicate packets that are coming on a switch, which looks very boring. And I talk to this product manager and he says, if you could take those packets and send it to a camera, so I can verify when Dave is coming to draw money from the ATM way back in 2005. Just boom. I said, okay, I'm going to go become a product manager. I got my MBA, kept on talking to people till someone gave me my first break. I started off as a routing product manager. Then became a wireless product manager across 3 companies, which was one was a startup, one was a mid-size, and third was Cisco. And during pandemic, when everyone went back home and we had some spare time at our hands, I started thinking, I got to reinvent myself in this world of cloud and security. So I left a very comfortable job at Cisco, managing enterprise wireless, which was a $3 billion plus business, to coming to Palo to do something which was called SASE, which I didn't know. I didn't know cloud. I was sort of a newbie to security, but I took the plunge because I had to reinvent myself. And when you do these kind of career shifts, you got to know what your anchor is. I knew my anchor was understanding of enterprise, understanding of software, understanding transformation. And I brought that to my job. First 6 months, I learned. I kept my ears open, tried to speak less, learn more, listen and learn more, and then formed a view of what SASE should be and how do we drive change for customer, given that there were always Zscaler in the market at that point of time. How do you come in and sort of go and change the perception and become the SASE vendor of choice? And that's where, how do you create the right inflection points? How do you create things that customer really care about? That was done with a series of organic and inorganic acquisitions at Palo, including Prisma browser that we're going to talk about. And the net of it is, Dave, we took the business that was less than 100 million to 1.5 billion plus. So that's it. That's my career highlight in 5 minutes, Dave.
Fantastic. You were very succinct, but I want listeners to know that Anupam is truly a gem out there. He's a superstar. In fact, I grew up in India, so I know his credentials. He's a graduate of the very prestigious Indian Institute of Technology. So when Anupam was talking about reinventing himself, it reminded me of my own professional journey, and I don't plan to take up too much time, but I just thought of mentioning for a reason. I started my career in India as a chartered accountant. It was a long time ago. I'll be dating myself if I shared the specific time periods. However, the point is that I never expected to be doing what I'm doing today if somebody had asked me then. However, opportunities came, I took them on, and forever I found myself in an uncomfortable zone. I was never sticking to my sweet spot. I was always finding myself in areas where I didn't know much about. And that was always a tough experience. It was a steep climb. But once I did the climb, when I look back, I felt so much more empowered. And I always have this feeling that I don't know enough. Even today, I know very little. There's just so much out there. So I want to encourage also all listeners that never stop learning, never stop innovating, never stop reinventing, because there's just too much out there to appreciate, and it's okay to get out of your comfort zone. You might just find that you're just doing amazing things when you're being pushed to the brim or you're establishing stretch targets. So I'm so glad that Anupam mentioned that as one of highlights of his journey. Let's get back to our topic for today, just to provide a little bit of a historical context for the listeners. The early browsers primarily rendered static web pages. They weren't deeply integrated into enterprise workflows. Core business happened in local software such as ERP systems, Outlook, desktop Office. The browser was simply an information viewer. The IT and security teams focused on protecting networks and servers, not the browsers per se. Firewalls, intrusion detection, and endpoint controls tended to dominate. So Anupam, I come back to you with the question, what was it about the architecture and enterprise use of the browsers in the past that kept them out of the security spotlight?
I think you said it so well. And we both will keep on dating ourselves through this conversation. But if you go back to 2010s, which was 15 years back, the perimeters were defined, Dave. You go to an office, if you're lucky, you have a laptop or you have a workstation and you're working. And you work and you are accessing resources which are on-prem primarily. You are casually browsing, but most of the work that developers are doing remember Microsoft Office? You come on a desk, right? So everything is being done on-prem, everything is contained environment. You go back home and maybe let's go back 2000s. People are not working from home, right? And that's why browser was not at the center of the conversation because first off, the perimeters are defined where you work, which is an office, and the applications you're accessing were defined. They were thick applications sitting in the campus, sitting in data centers. What changed? I still remember being at my first AWS conference. And I think when cloud computing started becoming a big thing and the CSPs came in, Amazon, Microsoft, Azure, Google Cloud, Oracle, things changed. First of all, people started becoming more comfortable in moving apps to the cloud. Second thing is the invention of SaaS happened. People start saying, hey, look, I'm not going to go build HR systems myself. I'm going to use Workday. I'm going to use service of automation. And I'm not going to go and buy that Office Next upgrade and put it in my drive and try upgrading. It's going to be a service. Now, how do you consume all that service? When you think about applications sitting in the cloud, you think about SaaS, all that is happening in the browser. And I think that is where the conversation changed. And I think it got a bit of an acceleration, especially during the pandemic, when people became very comfortable working from home and really accessing applications in the cloud. That is where this whole concept of a centralized security went away. Security has to be as close to the edge,
which means as close to the user as possible.
What is closer to the user than the browser? And I think that's why you see that paradigm shift happening. Now browsers are becoming more central. And just the last part, Dave.
Yeah.
Now this again supercharged. And you look last 2 years, and all of us are ChatGPT, vibe coding. We are using everything out there. Google search used to be primary, now everything. There's so many more things that we do for information consumption, for creating content, for creating code. Guess where that happens, Dave? In the browser.
In the browser.
So that's why I think the conversation has now shifted to why browser needs to be secure.
Very true. As you said, enterprise applications, whether it's Salesforce, Workday, Microsoft 365, they're all running in the browser. Every session is carrying sensitive data, So that's kind of where things are moving in that direction. In fact, research finds that over 90% of the attacks begin in the browser. Yes. From phishing links, drive-by downloads, malicious extensions, or session hijacking. So the cyber warfare is expanding, is changing, and now the browsers seem to be the focus. But having said that, if you were to speak to a lot of the regular people, they'll say, we understand security of the browser. We make sure the site is secure. We go to sites that are HTTPS, and there are secure protocols that connect us. So what's the big deal?
Yeah. Great question. Let's step back for a second. I think it's a great question that you asked because you're right. The apps that you're talking with have their own security. They probably have some security on the endpoint. Let's talk about a few things. And we'll try to sort of tear this conversation into multiple things. Let's start with, I'm having this conversation with you on my unmanaged device. On unmanaged device, I can do my personal things. I can also access corporate applications. The bleeding happens between corporate applications and personal. The first thing is data sanctity. So forget about security for a second. How does corporation, as it enables you to bring your own devices or unmanaged devices to give you freedom, how do corporations make sure that their data is not compromised? It could be willingly or unwillingly. Willingly, look, I am trying to be creative with my response. I use ChatGPT and unknowingly I put confidential data out there. How do I protect from that? The second thing could be I'm an evil person. I'm just trying to take corporate data, put it on my unmanaged device. And then once it's on my unmanaged device, I can do anything with that. So that's one part, data. The second part is when you think, and we'll go back to the unmanaged device conversation. If I want to give freedom of devices to my users, how do I make sure that they are not doing willingly or unwillingly things that they should not? Like you and I are on a Zoom, I should not be sharing my Confluence, which has my private company documents. If I do it unwillingly, how do I have the right policies? Right? So how do I give you freedom, but make sure that my data, my applications are not covered. So that's one. But there's a second part, which is broader. And you touched upon it, and I want to go a bit deeper. You talked about extensions, malicious extensions. Malicious extensions, once they come in, they are on your endpoint in your browser. Most EDR solutions are oblivious to what's happening in the browser. So EDR, I'm sorry, I shouldn't give the acronym. EDR is endpoint detection and response. Palo Alto offers it. Other companies also offer it. That gives you endpoint protection. But a lot of time, what's happening in the browser is harder to figure out. So now the question becomes, if there is an extension that is malicious, that goes and steals your data and sends it to someplace else, it's not part of your network security path. It's just out of band. That's one thing. Second is there is malware that is increasingly coming to the browser and in a way is getting assembled in the browser. So how do you protect against that part? So first, we talk about unmanaged devices, data center. Secondly, we talked about these new attacks happening that are getting more and more focus on the browser. Then there's the third part, Dave. We all know HTTP3. We all know QUIC. We all know, and I'll get a bit technical, we all know certificate pinning, where these things just make traffic harder to decrypt in the network. That's one. And second would be business decisions. You could say, I'm not going to decrypt traffic like Microsoft Office 365. So now you are saying, I'm going to favor experience versus security. It becomes an either or conversation. I think that's where also browser helps. Because I see traffic before it gets encrypted, all these rules don't apply. Even if it's harder to decrypt in the network, if business policies don't allow it, I can still see the content and I can apply the right security policies. So those are the three things, Dave, where browser actually shines, secure browser shines, or enterprise browser, and gives enterprises added benefit.
That's wonderfully explained. So I guess the follow-up to that would be, let's say I'm a CISO listening in on this conversation. What do I do to make sure that my organization has done the needful when it comes to securing their browsers? What are maybe a checklist of items or a set of steps? What would you recommend?
Yeah. See, secure browser is really one component in your zero trust journey. So when you think about CISOs who are in a way making sure that as CIOs go on their cloud transformation, security doesn't get compromised. You want to make sure you have a zero trust architecture. Zero trust means zero trust. No one is allowed to talk to no one. User is not allowed to application till I establish implicit trust. So now, as part of zero trust framework, like I said at the beginning, you want to make sure that security actions happen as close to the edge as possible. Now, having said that, now let's get to your question. How do I make sure my browser is ready? Honestly, this is a choice, Dave, right? A lot of commercial browsers that are built for delighting customers, are for speed, for convenience, for the jazz. They're not for security. As those browsers get attacked every day, the commercial browsers are not really reacting at that agility. Bridge against those gaps. So first of all, you want to make sure your browser is hardened. It's a secure browser. It's optimized for enterprise. It's not optimized for personal because it creates more attack vectors. So first of all, making sure you have a hardened browser. That's the first part. The second part is making sure that if you enable access to your corporate applications through the browser can enforce the right security and DLP policies in the browser. That becomes very important. And the third, last but not the least, how does that browser provide your network security, which is really the zero trust, zero trust, added visibility, added granularity to make more intelligent security decisions are the three things that I would say, Dave.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, as you were sharing those three things, a thought that came to mind, which is kind of a very common, you hear it a lot, that there's always that friction between security and convenience.
Yes.
Like you said, that the browsers are made so that users can have fun surfing or doing whatever. But at the same time, protection is critical, so the enterprises should have very hardened browsers. So that begs the question, so if you have a very hardened browser, to what extent does that, for lack of a better word, affect ease of use and the implications of that from the users, such as the employees? And I don't know, this is where you are technically more sound to shed light. When a company is engaging with a service provider who's coming in externally, using maybe a different browser, but they're having to engage with this, let's say, a more secure and hardened browser, does the experience for them as well change? And you get my question, right? Basically, is by hardening the browser, how much does it impact usability, ease of use?
Yeah, great. So let's get into it. See there, I see us as myself as two people, two personalities. One is personal. I do my personal stuff. I want to have flexibility and freedom of using what I want. Corporations should not mandate that on me. It's a personal choice. I use Chrome, whether I use Firefox. So that's one part. But as I transition to corporate world, I owe corporation, there's a fiduciary responsibility to ensure that I'm not doing things that I should not be. I think when you look at enterprise browser, it's really optimized for enterprise usage. I still believe that there are two browsers. One is for personal use, one is for enterprise use. You want to keep those lives separate. Now the question, now you came back to and I'll address the experience in a second, but I want to address the SP very briefly. I think you want to allow the customer or the end user the flexibility of doing what they want personally. But once they engage with corporate, you want to bump them to the enterprise. Bumping them to the enterprise browser can be managed through identity. That look, if you're going to something, and if you come through a commercial browser, you're using corporate identity, I'll bump you to enterprise browser. Or you can use an extension, which you provide, to bump. And that's fine. Now let's get to the crux of the question. The question was, okay, great. Anupam, are we compromising experience? No. And I'll get a bit more granular about that. Secure browser, giving more security does not mean that the speed and the response and the tools, agentic tools, they get compromised. No.
Okay.
What we put a spotlight and guardrails is on, you are using data the right way. You're not going to a bad website. You're not compromising enterprise assets. You're not compromising your browser. That's what we are focusing on. So then what that means is you might experience a loss of freedom when you're interacting with corporate data, right? That's what it is.
Yep.
Nothing more, nothing less. It's not that you'll have a subpar experience when you use applications.
So that would make me think that it's a no-brainer to make sure that the enterprises are adopting and using hardened browsers, because you definitely want to make sure that the exchange is as secure as possible. That should almost be, and it's always nicer, easier if you can use technology to enforce good security hygiene. For instance, I'm remote, probably I'm using an unsecure network, but I'm having to do business, and let's say I connect to the secure browser to do business. And once again, enlighten us, will the secure browser detect that I'm coming in from an unsecure network and not allow me to begin the session? Or do they have checks and balances built in that will offset that and ensure that it's a secure session, even though I'm coming in from a relatively insecure, let's say a public Wi-Fi network, let's say?
Yeah, the beauty of a secure browser is we assume that the environment that we are in is hostile. We don't assume that the endpoint is clean. We do not assume that the Wi-Fi that we're coming on is clean. Our job is, when Dave comes in on an enterprise browser, whether he's coming in from an unmanaged device or public Wi-Fi, I provide Dave access to corporate resources based on his role, and so he has access to everything that he should have, and ensure that he's interacting with data in the right way. So no, it doesn't matter whether you're coming in from. Remember, Dave, one more thing, and I just want to stress this.
Yeah.
The browser is assuming that if you're on an unmanaged device, it might be used by many people. I cannot guarantee that that laptop is pristine or that device is pristine. So the assumption is built in. I might get attacked from the endpoint. And that's the hardening of the browser, that the browser will operate in a hostile environment and make sure that your data is protected. And Dave, here's the beauty, right? Tomorrow, If Dave decides to walk away, let's say you're a Palo Alto employee, and you say, you know what, I'm going to move on. As I revoke your credentials from the IDP, from the identity provider, from Dave has no access. If you launch the Prisma browser, you have to, as you put in your username and password, you're not seen as a Palo Alto employee anymore. And you have access to no more resources. So it is really a secure workspace. That's what the enterprise browser is.
Absolutely. But at the same time, I think you will agree that securing the browsers is a piece of the overall cybersecurity governance strategy and not the only thing.
100%.
And as I shared with you during our briefing session, a framework that I tend to rely on, I call it the Commitment, Preparedness, Discipline Framework, a holistic governance framework. And I've developed it over a period of time. It's empirically validated. It threw up 17 success factors: technical, leadership, cultural, behavioral, only to prove the point that securing an organization, securing the network, securing the data, securing people is a multidimensional game where you need the right technology, you need the processes, you need the people, and of course, you need the overall environment. To put our discussion in context, we were talking about one aspect of that governance approach philosophy, that you better do the browser thing well, because that's a very important part, because that is a vector for different types of attacks. However, there has to be complemented by the other pieces of the puzzle, whether it's active engagement of the senior leadership who take interest to make sure that all that can be done is being done, whether it's empowering the CISO, getting everybody involved to do their part, and more. And also institutionalizing processes that force a certain level of organizational discipline, whereby once you have these secure processes in place, they should almost operate in an automated fashion, and it cannot be tweaked and changed if somebody felt like doing so. So you want to bring in a semblance of stability and maturity to the security governance infrastructure. And this way, over a period of time, the organization continues to go up the trajectory of a very secure enterprise, and it doesn't have those highs and lows that I've often seen when, let's say, a very highly credible CISO leaves and another CISO has just arrived. So it doesn't have these fluctuations. Reaches a certain steady state. So that I wanted to share with listeners, that keep that in mind, that this is one piece of the puzzle, but there are more to it when you're taking a comprehensive approach to security. But I turn it back to you if you'd like to add something, Anupam, to that.
Yeah. So Dave, I had the benefit of reading your exec summary, which you shared with me. And I agree, it's a process, people, and technology. So let's talk about all three. Zero trust is a journey, and there are three places in zero trust. One is network. Second is endpoint. And third is cloud, cloud is DevOps, where you are building applications. You got to secure that part. Second is network. You want to make sure your network is robust, but you got to have a defense in depth solution. You got to ensure, okay, if that breaks, I have network. If that breaks, I need a SIM solution, right? Where I can do security incident and management. So the framework needs to be comprehensive across endpoint, network, cloud, and the ability to respond to events. When that happens, that's a SOC. So I think point very well articulated that you need defense and depth across. And the second part is in zero trust, like you said, even if people change, there needs to be a robust process of zero trust. There are zero trust guidelines. Hey, look, these are things I trust. Things could be application devices. These are users I trust. You need to have that trust relationship be part of the process. So as personal movements happens or application movements happen or new people come in, that process and the defense and depth in the technology stack guides their decision making. So 100% agree with that framework.
Amazing. So another question that comes to mind, Anupam, is when you engage with clients and let's say you're having this discussion of having secure browsers in place, what have you seen in terms of implementation challenges or buy-in challenges?
I think one thing what happens is You will see some regulated industries that have standardized.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of companies have not standardized on a browser. They come in on Firefox, Safari, Chrome. I don't care. So the first question really becomes, how do I do this transition?
Mm-hmm.
And I think, Dave, it's easier if you're talking about a workforce that you haven't enabled, like third party. You say, hey, man, you got two options. You ship them a managed laptop or you use my browser. And there the choices are easy.
Okay.
I think the choices become a bit harder when you are something that's already in your network framework. You already have a managed device that already has a client. You see, okay, how do I roll up? I understand the benefits, but how do I tell my end users to switch from their browser to this browser? And that's where the biggest challenge comes. Unmanaged device easy, managed is easier. And I think that's where we'll go back to your framework. You got to have a process in place. You cannot say my way or the highway because that's where you will see end user rebellion. And that's it has to be a gradual phase where you got to establish value with the end user and the app that there's a benefit of browser. What we have seen in these scenarios is with our extension that you can put on the commercial browser that people are using of choice, they start getting educated on what the challenges with a consumer browser. And then you gently use that extension strategy to nudge them to the enterprise browser. So that works well, right? So that way, then what happens is now you can do this in a phased fashion, do it for a set of customer population. You're not trying to take their independence away or flexibility away. You are making the commercial and the enterprise browser coexist. So that's how.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. Along those lines, something that I have found a lot of success with, and it also applies in this context, is as long as you're able to get the leadership, whether it's the board or the C-level team, to recognize that browser security is a strategic business risk, you get their attention. And that's the first step. And then, of course, from a preparedness standpoint, whether it's simulating browser-based breach scenarios, leveraging AI-driven platforms, you talked about SASE, and then training employees to spot browser risks. So you have to have a continuous approach, whether it's tabletop exercises or any kind of simulation, where you're constantly testing to make sure that what you have in place works. Because you never know, these hackers, they always find a way in. So you think your browser is very hardened, but then they have found some way of compromising it. So it's very important to stay on top of things. And finally, the third anchor of the CPD framework is discipline. And in this context, that relates to applying consistent security controls across every device, replacing fragmented tools with unified approaches. So that's that kind of a holistic approach, whether it's to ensure a hardened browser or to ensure other pieces of security are in place. I think that in the long run will take the organization far, will be a very substantive approach to security. But Anupam, this has been fantastic. We are coming towards the end of our discussion, unfortunately, because I'm just enjoying learning so much from you. I'm sure listeners are learning. How about you help us wrap it up with some final words, some final takeaways? If there are 2 or 3 things that you want listeners to take away from this discussion, what would they be?
I think I'll start with what you just ended with. Security is a mindset. And when I say security, I think about that as zero trust. It's a
Mindset, yeah.
So first of all, make sure when you're thinking about zero trust, it's a mindset. Second is you want to ensure that you think about zero trust as a defense and depth solution, where you have a robust network security, endpoint security, cloud security, and a SOC, right? To ensure that you have the right remediation and response. And then think about browser as one more toolkit in your security arsenal to help you combat attacks that are directly happening in the browser, attacks that are harder to inspect in the network. Think about browser giving you a more robust security posture when you interact with enterprise applications. Think about enterprise browser as giving you more freedom and flexibility to adopt devices of your choice without compromising security. So those are the 3 takeaways, I would say.
Well, Anupam, it's truly been a pleasure. Thank you so much for your time and your insights, and hope we can do a sequel another time.
Absolutely, Dave. Great chatting with you. Thank you for the opportunity.
The information contained in this podcast is for general guidance only. The discussants assume no responsibility or liability for any errors or omissions in the content of this podcast. The information contained in this podcast is provided on an as-is basis with no guarantee of completeness, accuracy, usefulness, or timeliness. The opinions and recommendations expressed in this podcast are those of the discussants and not of any organization.